Fantastic. Welcome all. Thank you once again for joining us. Speaking of orchestration and open source tools, let us discuss the CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous deployment tooling in the context of our project. Before we deep dive in our implementation choice for the pipeline, that is also our orchestrator and bridge to the different testing components, I'd like to start with a few minutes of why do we care about a CI/CD pipeline through it at all. And it is because the paradigm of how we build software from the purely practical side is shifting, rightfully so, towards the developers having more control and more saying how the software is actually produced, operated, deployed, run and operated. And traditionally, until now, the VNF or CNF vendor that is packaging an application, and we've already heard what we mean by a net application in the context of 5GASP, would have, of course, an internal pipeline that would verify that the application works as expected. Of course, in the context of NetApps, it becomes a bit more difficult because you need actually a way to test it on underlying infrastructure. You package it up and you put it in some kind of catalog where customers would get it. These days, as most software shifts, again, to a more versatile way of continuously built, deployed, and operated as a SaaS, including the VNF, CNF functions, we expect something more of the following. We expect an end-to-end system where the software vendors are responsible for building the software, and then they partner up with a platform like 5GASP to initially validate whether you've put all the necessary information, tests, suits, and descriptors that we have briefly mentioned, and you can see in the ongoing project and documentation, deploy it to a catalog, onboard it into test infrastructure, stage it, test it, deploy, have the results, and then of course it'd be up to the vendors to operate and monitor it, and of course then all the other day two parts of operating software and application. So obviously we need an automated pipeline to build all this. And while we have OpenSlice as one of the core orchestrators of the 5GASP platform that we're building upon and stepping in creating this, how do we make sure that this process is easy enough for SMEs to, or companies that don't have an extensive internal infrastructure to be able to use and kind of bring up their value add for what they're offering, so that they offload this to us and we can be of service. So let's talk about how this is achieved in practice. Of course, there are many parts to an industry CI/CD tools. Actually, there is this ecosystem slide that has all these different small logos on the side. For example, some of the big ones, Jenkins will talk about this, of course, but other CI/CD systems exist. Concourse, you need secrets management, you need repository management, sometimes you need code inspections. A lot of these can be internalized, but what do we do for an external facing CI/CD tool that bridges our platform and our sites? By the way, internally, I've even seen instances of GitLab being used as a CI/CD tool for verification of some VNFs, which is quite interesting, but it requires a lot of hacking. So we went with something industry standard, I would say, that is familiar to a lot of developers, because we also want the ramp-up time to be as low as possible. So we went with Jenkins. What is Jenkins? For those old enough, it was actually called Hudson, but it is a very popular open source project. We'll talk a little bit about it, then how to use it and what's its role in 5GASP. So it is an open source server that allows automated builds of the software or deployments, pretty much execution of a number of scripts, tests or verification how the software behaves, and then scripts that could be post the test phase, usually a deployment part. So it's a very popular tool for software development. Being an open source project, it actually has a very large community. We have over 1,600 plugins across many different areas: administration of Jenkins, source code management, bridging it up to different systems, managing the builds from the different parts in build systems that are language specifics. We have a UI for this, by the way, but also other means of actually administering it. It's very feature rich, which is why it was important for us. It's very well supported by the ecosystem, or and commonly used in practice. And it's probably the widest choice for on-premise Jenkins, on-premise CI/CD service. And we did need an on-premise one to put in as part of our platform that we're operating. We wanted the flexibility of that, specifically how to tie it around our SCM system, and how to make sure that we can support all the platforms these are going to run on. Now, how to use Jenkins, just a very quick primer for the purposes of what's its place in 5GAS. Well, Jenkins has a rich API. It also has a CLI, UI, and of course, language-specific wrappers that could be used. In our case, we choose to use the APIs and the wrappers mostly. And let's briefly talk about the ways we could deploy Jenkins. So one, of course, on-premise deployment model would be standalone. And the other one would be a primary, secondary, master, slave, or a so-called cluster deployment, where you have one master controlling several subordinate nodes. Actually, a better way usually to do that is creation of Jenkins swarms. With swarms, you can actually have the secondary nodes discover the first one, so kind of dynamically creating more worker nodes without having to manage a static configuration of what the cluster looks like. It works better for scaling, and this would allow us to actually have our system configurable and support more NetApps on it. Then, as the automated pipeline goes, you actually, what normally the CI/CD server does in terms of CI would be to check out the code that has been developed, build, test, and display results, or proceed to a deployment phase where you actually deploy the code on an infrastructure. Now we'll see that we don't actually check out any code, but we rely on whatever was provided in the 5GAS repository in terms of what we need to test, along with some of the tests. But I'll get to that in a minute. Pipelines are composed of several stages. Each stage can have several steps. They can be described and checked in the source control environment so that they're stable, and they can also go along with your code. And we're actually going to take advantage of that feature, because this is how Jenkins allows to use custom-made pipelines, which we will actually employ for each NetApp. So, what is Jenkins' role in our project? Well, in 5GAS, one of the main components is our internal CI/CD service. So we'll deploy a Jenkins agent per NetApp. These agents are independent and separate from each other, as the goal is for us to be able to scale and test many standalone NetApps without having to interrelate or be noisy of the testing of each one. That's why we are not actually deploying a Jenkins cluster, but it would make it too highly coupled to our underlying system, which we want to avoid. Let me go through a simple way of how we're going to do the Jenkins testing pipeline. So the testing pipeline is going to be configured dynamically. So you deploy your NetApp and some testing descriptor. And then that's going to be provided to the Jenkins pipeline configuration. And with some Python wrappers, we are going to upload it via, well, we're going to use Python in this case to access the Jenkins API and create the pipeline out of it. Now, regarding the stages of the pipeline, first, what we do is we set up the testing environment. Jenkins will request that from the test repository, as that is part of the upload initially. These tests are created using the robot framework, and they will address the how the NetApps are going to be tested, but there are going to be two types of actually tests. They're going to be the standard tests that we are keeping as part of 5GAS. They're going to be multi-purpose. We can, employ them for a wide range of NetApps. But we're also going to allow the developers of NetApps that deploy them to specify their own tests. And so these tests are going to be created by the NetApps developers. And after gathering the results from that, the results from all the tests, the standard ones we've deployed and the developer ones, are going to be shown on the dashboard that we'll be building, so that you can have feedback on how the NetApp is behaving on the different infrastructures that it's being tested on as part of our sites. So in relationship, I wouldn't say it's, and so in conclusion, I wouldn't say it is rocket science of how we're going to be deploying and building a CI/CD pipeline. Exactly the inverse. We are actually looking towards using something a bit more interesting, specific, and something more familiar and widely used. So it serves all of our purposes. We can do automated software validation there in a standardized manner. And of course, it's agile enough, and we hope that it's going to speed up the development of NetApps by bringing in this pipeline that actually helps you see what the status is on the underlying site infrastructure. And with that, I think I ran a bit faster, so we can open the floor for some questions. But Yogo, I'll let you be the judge of that.
Thank you, Veslan. Now, just in time for one or two questions. So let's give some time for people to type in their questions. While we wait for any questions from the audience, I'll have a question. So choosing Jenkins, why choosing Jenkins? Are we limited to Jenkins?
No. So as I said, this is the internal way, the abstraction layer. I mean, it's our internal contract of how we are going to test among the sites. What the developers care about and what we care about is that the developers provide their tests alongside their NetApps, and that we can then, from the platform side, read them and deploy them. Now, I don't see a reason why we would change it earlier on. And even though we say we are not dependent on it, once we actually build all the bindings and wrappers that we interact with it, we are kind of, committing to it, but that's okay.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Just to stress out, we are not limiting the tests that are provided with our NetApps to work with Jenkins, so it can work with anything because we're targeting the wrappers. So we're flexible enough to support tests built for other platforms.